everyone, and welcome to A Balancing Act, the podcast devoted to helping families navigate memory loss and dementia. I'm Kelly Burtonshaw. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to dive into a dilemma that almost every caregiver will eventually face. It's that moment when love, safety, and autonomy begin pulling in different directions. What do you do when the person you're caring for insists on a freedom that could actually harm them? And as caregivers, it just comes naturally to us, right? Safety should come first. When someone you love is vulnerable, every potential danger begins to feel magnified. You imagine the worst-case scenarios long before they may happen, and then it becomes almost impossible to unsee those possibilities. And caregiving inside a home introduces a quieter ethical tension. Those same actions that reduce risk can sometimes erode things that are equally important. Your loved one's sense of independence, their identity, and that they are still a person living their own life, rather than simply being managed by others. In my years of experience, I can tell you that families rarely recognize when the shift regarding safety begins. It doesn't arrive in a dramatic moment when someone stands up and declares that their loved one is just no longer in charge. Instead, it unfolds gradually through a series of protective decisions that each seem perfectly reasonable on their own. A daughter will quietly take over the checkbook after noticing a few late payments. A son I know insists on handling errands because letting their father drive now feels stressful. And in another case, meals began appearing on a table without the mom being asked whether she wanted to cook. Tools can disappear from the garage, ladders are quietly taken away from the home. But taken together, these small adjustments can begin shrinking the world of the person at the center of the family. I once worked with a man named Robert who had spent decades running a small hardware store. He was always the person the neighbors turned to when something broke. Fixing things was not just a task for him. It was a reflection of how he understood himself. But when cognitive changes started to make themselves evident, his children, understandably, grew concerned about safety around tools and equipment. They began discouraging him from working in the garage, offering to handle repairs themselves. And at first he laughed it off, but over time, he stopped going out there altogether. Several months later, his daughter mentioned during a visit that he seemed unusually withdrawn. He wasn't depressed exactly, but something about him had shifted. And when we spoke privately, Robert explained it in a way that has always stayed with me. He said, "Everyone keeps saying they're helping me, but it feels like I just don't have much left to do." That sentence captures something essential about the caregiving dilemma. Safety decisions rarely exist in isolation. They reshape a person's role inside their own life. This is where the idea of the right to risk enters the conversation. Now, that phrase can feel uncomfortable the first time you hear it, especially for families who are trying to do anything to prevent harm. But the concept is rooted in a simple truth about life. Risk is inseparable from autonomy. Every adult navigates some degree of uncertainty in their daily decisions. We all drive cars, knowing that accidents can happen. We climb ladders, we cook. Even stepping outside every day doesn't bring any guarantee of safety. And our older adults don't suddenly lose the human need for agency simply because their bodies or minds begin changing. In fact, that need often becomes more pronounced. When tension appears, it's because caregivers begin measuring life primarily through a clinical lens. Safety becomes the primary metric, and everything else gradually reorganizes around it. But living safely and living meaningfully are not always identical goals. And this tension becomes particularly complex when cognitive changes enter the picture. In the early and middle phases of dementia, many individuals still understand their surroundings and can clearly articulate what they want. At the same time, the brain's ability to evaluate consequences may be shifting in subtle ways. Judgment can become inconsistent. Risks may feel less significant than they once did, and they may underestimate how their abilities have changed. All this creates what I often think of as a cognitive gray zone. The individual is neither fully incapable nor fully reliable in every situation. Families see this as vulnerability, but the person experiencing those changes may feel that everyone is just overreacting. Inside the cognitive gray zone, many caregiving decisions become ethical questions rather than purely medical ones. A lovely woman I worked with, Mary, always took so much pride in her cooking. The kitchen for her represented more than food preparation. It was tied to decades of routine and personal identity. And when her memory began affecting sequencing tasks, her family naturally started worrying about her leaving on the stove or leaving on the oven. Their temptation was to eliminate the risk entirely by removing Mary's access to cooking. But removing the activity can sometimes have unintended consequences. When a person loses the ability to participate in familiar roles, their sense of competence may erode faster than the disease itself would have required. That's why today many professionals in gerontology and dementia care have begun reframing the question. Instead of asking whether an activity should be allowed or forbidden, a more productive approach asks how the environment can be redesigned to support continued participation. Now, I know that shift sounds subtle, but it changes everything. I want us to take a small pause together. These conversations can bring up a lot, I know. And if what you're hearing feels helpful, I hope you'll take a moment to hit that follow button. It's a simple act that helps me keep bringing you new stories, insights, and encouragement to help lighten your load, even if it's just a little. And if the platform you listen to this podcast on allows reviews and ratings, please share your experience. This moves us up on the podcast lists, and that's how we can reach more families and provide the support they need. There's another way to show your support, through a donation. Just look for the Buy Me a Coffee link in today's show notes. This helps us keep the mic on and the episodes coming. Thank you so much for listening and for being part of this community. Now, some good news for everyone involved is that today there are more home safety tools available than ever before. For example, rather than removing a stove, the family might install automatic shut-off devices that turn off the burners or the oven after a period of inactivity. Even adding brighter lighting to the area where your loved one cooks can help them keep a closer eye on the stovetop. And think about induction cooktops, which cool off very quickly once a pot is removed. That act of cooking for themselves, which once looked like an unsafe activity, becomes manageable. Technology is expanding these possibilities even further. Today, homes can quietly monitor patterns of movement, detect unusual activity, and alert caregivers if something appears out of the ordinary. Wearable devices can detect falls automatically. Voice assistants can offer reminders about medications or appointments without requiring constant supervision from a family member. And when used carefully, these tools create what might be described as a safety net rather than a cage. They allow a person to move through their home with relative freedom while still providing reassurance to the family. But technology alone cannot resolve the emotional complexity of these caregiving decisions. Perhaps the most powerful tool available to families is simply conversation, particularly conversations that occur before safety decisions become urgent. Too often, discussions about safety happen after a crisis, a fall, a kitchen fire, or a wandering episode. All of these force an issue into the open and demand immediate response. By that point, everyone's emotions are already running high, and as a result, the person experiencing the cognitive changes may feel that decisions are being imposed rather than negotiated. Earlier conversations can look very different. I remember sitting with a woman named Eleanor and her 2 adult daughters when Eleanor's driving was becoming a concern. Instead of beginning the conversation with all the safety risks involved and the restrictions we might impose, we started with a question. What mattered most to Eleanor about remaining independent? And she didn't hesitate. She said she wanted to be able to leave her house when she wanted to, and she didn't want to feel like a burden on her children. And these priorities are what shaped the entire conversation. Once everyone understood what independence meant to her, the family began exploring ways to preserve those elements, even if her driving eventually became unsafe. By the time she finally chose to stop driving, the loss was still very real. But it didn't feel like the end of her autonomy because the transition had been shaped around her voice. Caregiving decisions become far more sustainable when the person receiving care participates in defining the boundaries. And this leads us to another concept, sometimes called negotiated risk. Rather than eliminating all danger, negotiated risk acknowledges that adults, even vulnerable adults, may choose to accept certain risks in order to maintain a meaningful life. The role of the caregivers, then, becomes guiding those choices toward manageable levels of safety rather than imposing complete control. And this might involve agreeing on certain conditions that allow an activity to continue. Arranging for walking buddies for your dad who always took his early evening stroll. Wearing a GPS-enabled watch so your loved one can be located if they become disoriented. And a person who enjoys gardening might continue working outside with raised garden beds, and then any lawn maintenance requiring power tools or heavy equipment was performed by the family. The goal is not to eliminate the hazard. The goal is to ensure that the remaining risks are understood and shared. Now, I say all this knowing that none of it makes the emotional burden disappear for caregivers. Family members tell me they feel as though they're standing between 2 possible regrets. Allowing independence can feel terrifying because something might go wrong. Restricting independence can feel equally painful because it risks diminishing the person they love, and there is rarely a perfect solution. But one helpful perspective, a life that is technically safe but stripped of agency, may not align with what the individuals themselves consider meaningful. Quality of life matters. Their voice matters. Their routines that make their day recognizable still matter. And those early and thoughtful conversations about the right to risk can preserve independence far longer than many families expect. Because at its best, home care is not about preventing every possible mistake. It's about helping someone continue to live a life that still feels like their own. In today's show notes, I've included some wonderful resources you can check out regarding this topic. And as always, please reach out to me, message me on Facebook with any questions or comments. That's why I'm here. I would love to hear from you. And I hope that you will give yourself this grace. No one is perfect at this. No one. You're doing the best you can. You're doing it from a place of love. And that is enough. I'm Kelly Burtonshaw, and it was my pleasure spending time with you today. Please keep in touch.
Hi, I'm Peggy Wright, editor and producer of this podcast. We know that juggling your loved one's care while trying to manage your own life can truly become a balancing act. We want to help you as you navigate this journey by offering our support. You can reach out to us anytime by going to our Facebook page to ask questions, leave comments for Kelly, or talk with her one-on-one by setting up a chat. The link is in the show notes. And you can find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please take a moment to rate and review so we can continue to provide relevant content. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for listening today.